Welcome to Plot Twist, your place for quick summaries of movies with jaw-dropping twists. Let's dive in. The movie begins with a bus whose brakes fail. The passengers panic and scream, and a policeman named Brian sees them. He notices a group of children crossing the street with their dog. Before the bus hits them, he rushes to save them. The dog flies into the air, and Brian saves the children at the last moment. He throws a hook towards the bus and stops it, then manages to catch the dog before it falls to the ground. People are amazed by him. He goes to a doctor named Brenda, who tells him she's impressed by him, but it turns out all of this was just a dream Brian was having. Benny, his niece who lives with him, comes to tell him that tomorrow is the parents' meeting at her school. He responds that he doesn't want to go because it would embarrass her in front of her classmates since he's working as a security guard in a lab. He tells her that his dream is to become a policeman. The scene shifts to a lab for robots and advanced devices, where we see Dr. Brenda installing a chip into a device. She tells her father that this chip will make their project successful. They are working on creating a mechanical leg, which she and her father managed to activate successfully, making her very happy. Meanwhile, Brian is at work in the lab and sees Dr. Brenda on the surveillance cameras as she's leaving. It's clear he's very attracted to her, so he quickly goes to talk to her. At the same time, a man named Solex is monitoring her with a camera from his car. We see Brian approaching Brenda and trying to talk to her, but she's not paying much attention. He keeps talking about random topics just to spend more time with her. She suddenly remembers she forgot her keys in the lab and goes back to get them. Solex orders his assistant Sykes to move the car and enter the lab, but their cat accidentally interferes with the control device, causing the car to crash into the lab. Small robots emerge from the car, enter the lab, and steal the mechanical leg and its control helmet. Before leaving, they attack Artemis, Brenda's father. Brian realizes there's a security breach and quickly enters the lab, finding Brenda crying over her father. He promises her he won't rest until he catches the killer. He rushes out, gets into his car, and drives at full speed to catch Solex. While driving, there's a bowling ball next to him, which he moves aside to drive properly. Sykes pours oil on the ground, causing Brian to lose control of his car, which flips over. Solex emerges from his car's roof and throws a device at Brian's car, causing it to explode. However, the bowling ball flies out and hits Solex's hand, injuring him. The next morning, Brenda learns what happened to Brian and visits him in the hospital. She finds him completely bandaged, looking like a mummy. The doctors inform her that there's no part of Brian's body that isn't damaged. She insists that he risked his life to save her, so they must help him in any way possible. They decide to equip his body with advanced devices to help him live and continue his life. Meanwhile, we see Solex, who has lost his hand due to the bowling ball, and replaces it with a metal hand. After some time, Brian regains consciousness, but is disoriented and confused. He struggles to get up and goes to a mirror, shocked to see strange things coming out of his fingers. He assumes it's a side effect of the treatment. Suddenly, a rocket shoots out of his leg, causing chaos in the hospital. He panics and runs away, unable to control himself. He encounters Dr. Brenda, who calms him down and reminds him of the accident day, telling him there was no hope for his survival. She explains that he is now a highly advanced network of tissues, devices, and computer programs, making him the first robotic policeman. This means he can finally achieve his dream of joining the police force. At the same time, Solex and his assistant are trying to activate the mechanical leg using the helmet but fail. The scene shifts back to Brenda, who explains to Brian the nature of his new abilities as a robotic policeman. She advises him to thoroughly read his instruction manual to control his capabilities. She presents him with a special uniform and takes him to an open space to train him. However, he's too nervous and unable to use his abilities because he hasn't read the manual properly. Later, she surprises him with a highly advanced car as a gift, explaining its features. He gets into the car, which turns into a robot and starts talking and moving. Brian struggles to control it, and a robot appears on the car's screen, punching him. Brian talks to the robot, suggesting they work together to help people. Strangely, they end up assisting thieves in stealing a car because Brian doesn't realize they're criminals. It's evident that Brian's brain was affected by the accident, significantly lowering his intelligence. After several attempts to regain control, Brian manages to catch the thief. Later, we see him tying a bow tie as he prepares to attend a Halloween party, celebrating the success of the robotic policeman project. At the party, he meets Brenda and dances with her. During their dance, Solex approaches and tries to get to know Brenda, annoying Brian, who walks away. He presses his ear against a statue to eavesdrop, but accidentally detaches his ear. When he returns to Brenda, she tells him that Solex offered her a job with significant funding and her own lab, making her very happy. Brian, however, feels uneasy and tries to warn her. A journalist interrupts them to take a photo of Brian with his police colleagues. Brian asks his boss when he'll be assigned challenging tasks. His boss replies that he needs to start with simple tasks and train first. Over time, Brian realizes that all the tasks he's given are easy and unrelated to real police work. He becomes convinced they're treating him as a burden and decides to confront his boss, requesting to work on the Artemis case and Brenda's project. His boss tells him that such important cases are for real policemen and dismisses him from his office. Meanwhile, Solex is working on creating a robot similar to Brian after stealing Brenda's research files. He successfully activates the robot, but it turns out to be reckless and destructive. Brian, undeterred by his boss's words, sneaks into the station and takes the file on Brenda's father's case. He finds a metal piece with letters engraved on it and tries to decipher their meaning. While examining the file, his reckless robot counterpart appears, scaring people and children on the street and causing chaos. Brian drives his car and notices a passing truck with the same letters as those on the metal piece. He discovers it's affiliated with Solex's company. He confirms that he is involved in the theft of the robot and the murder of Artemis, putting Brenda in danger. He quickly heads to Solex's building, where she is in his office watching the news about Brian's duplicate causing chaos and fires in the city. She initially thinks it's the real Brian and can't believe what she's seeing. We return to Brian, who removes the hook from his head and climbs the building with it, reaching Brenda. He warns her about Solex and his plan, urging her to leave the place. He continues climbing to the rooftop and manages to locate the robot, confirming that it is the thief and the killer. She discovers that there's a second robotic version and becomes anxious, wanting to leave. At that moment, Brian tries to take the robot, but the alarm goes off. He falls and attempts to escape, but fails. We return to Brenda and her duplicate, who wants to leave and talk to her. The duplicate reveals that she was locked in the lab and never allowed out, and she learns from her that Solex stole the robot from the lab. Brenda is shocked and realizes that Solex is the killer, then runs away. At the same time, Solex captures Brian and shows him his duplicate, demonstrating how it harms people in the streets and destroys the city. He explains that everyone believes the duplicate is the real Brian and reveals his plan to create more robotic versions to carry out his orders, allowing him to rule the world. Solex removes Brian's chip, breaks it, disables him, and orders his assistant to throw him into the junkyard. Brenda goes to Brian's house but doesn't find him. She takes Benny in the car to search for him. Meanwhile, Brian's duplicate arrives at the station, attacks the officers, accesses the files, and shoots fire from his hands at the officers. He leaves the station, and fires spread through the city, terrifying people. Luckily, Benny and Brenda find Brian, but they discover him discarded in the junkyard and disabled. They are deeply saddened, but Benny is surprised when Brian regains consciousness and speaks to them. Brenda discovers that Brian can function without the chip. They get into the car, and Brian uses his mental engine to drive at maximum speed. They drop Benny off at home, and Brian and Brenda head to Solex. They locate him in his car with Brian's duplicate. Brenda drives while Brian jumps onto Solex's car and confronts him, accusing him of murdering Artemis, Brenda's father. However, the duplicate attacks Brian and throws him out of the car. Brian uses his long legs to catch up with them. The duplicate confronts him, and the two fight, falling to the ground. Meanwhile, Brenda continues chasing Solex until they reach his company's headquarters. Solex captures her and takes her to the rooftop. While Brian is fighting his duplicate, he receives a message from his car's robot, informing him that Brenda is in danger and that Solex has taken her to the rooftop. Benny becomes worried about her uncle and heads to Solex's headquarters to help. She enters the lab and encounters Solex's assistant. Using her intelligence, she befriends him and starts a conversation. We return to Brian, who overcomes his duplicate, throws its head into the water, activates his helicopter, and flies it. At the same time, Solex reaches the rooftop, ties Brenda inside the aircraft, and starts flying. He is surprised to see Brian arriving, who uses a device from his hand to disable the aircraft. Solex loses control, and Brian rescues Brenda, deploying a parachute to safely land them in a fountain. Brenda quickly checks on Brian. Meanwhile, Solex lands with his parachute on Brian's car, where the robot attacks and traps him in a cage. The police arrive, and Benny explains everything that happened. She informs them that Solex created a duplicate of her uncle and programmed it for destruction to terrorize the city. Solex's assistant confirms Benny's account to the police chief and hands over the stolen robot. The police realize Brian is innocent and salute him. Reporters arrive, and Brian takes Brenda away to continue their life together. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel, activate the notification bell, like and share the video, and let us know in the comments about any series or movies you'd like us to summarize.